They stopped saying Lena's name long before they stopped using her. At first, she thought that was simply how villages worked. Children were praised when they were useful, corrected when they were loud, and forgotten when they became inconvenient. She thought silence was ordinary. She thought the coldness in people's faces meant she had failed in some small, fixable way. Not enough work, not enough charm, not enough brightness in the eyes. She learned differently at 14. On the winter evening, the chapel keeper tested the blood of every village child and held her wrist a moment too long. The whole of Dusk Hollow had gathered for the naming. It was an old custom. The children stood in a line before the Iron Saints, and one by one their gifts were called. Keen sight, healin' hands, wolf sense, herb touch, moon luck, fire pulse. Nothing grand, most years. Just enough of the old world still lingering in the blood to make a hard place survivable. When it was Lena's turn, the keeper pressed a silver needle to her thumb, smeared the drop against the black stone bowl, and waited. Nothing happened. No light in the blood, no warmth in the stone, no change in the air. The chapel grew very quiet. He tried again. Still nothing. The keeper's mouth tightened. Empty. One word. No one gasped. That would have suggested surprise. Dusk Hollow was not a dramatic village. It was a mean one. Practical. Efficient in its cruelties. The kind of place that did not need to hate you loudly in order to decide your life had become worth less. Her mother cried in the back pew. Her stepfather did not. He only looked at Lena once, with a flat expression she would remember for years afterward, then shifted his gaze away as if a door inside him had already closed. By spring, she had been moved from the family room to the back shed near the root cellar. By summer, she was eating after everyone else. By autumn, the village children had started calling her Hollow Girl when they wanted to be cruel and empty when they wanted to be clever. And by 19, she worked everywhere decent people preferred not to look. She cleaned slaughter boards after market days. She scrubbed soot from chapel walls after funeral smoke blackened the stone. She hauled spoiled grain from storage rooms. She washed fever cloths. She buried nameless dogs. She did the work that touched blood, ash, rot, grief, and embarrassment. Because Dusk Hollow had decided long ago that if Lena carried no blessing in her veins, then the least she could do was carry everyone else's filth. The village told itself, this was fair. Villages are very good at dressing convenience in the language of order. The punishment that changed her life began with a cracked plate. Mistress Head, who ran the communal kitchen with the grim authority of a woman who had once suffered and now demanded the right to pass suffering downward, found Lena crouched beside the stove after supper collecting fallen scraps into the hem of her apron. For what? Head asked. Lena stood too quickly. The ash pigs. There are no ash pigs in winter. The room went still. Steam rose from the broth pot. A spoon clinked softly somewhere. Two servant boys lowered their heads with the perfect speed of people who had learned how to survive other people's punishments. Head stepped forward, yanked open Lena's apron, and let the scraps fall to the floorboards. 3 potato peels, a heel of bread, 2 pieces of dried onion. Not enough to steal with dignity. Too much to deny. You take food now, Head said. I was going to throw it behind the sheds. For what? Lena hesitated. That was enough. Mistress Head's eyes sharpened. Lying makes ugly girls uglier. The kitchen laughed the way frightened people laugh when a powerful person invites them to. Lena lowered her gaze. There had been a time, years ago, when remarks like that made something hot rise into her throat. Shame, anger, grief. She could never tell. Over time, the feeling had thinned into endurance. Punishment was decided before the bowls were dry. She was sent below the old chapel to clean the crypt stones before dawn. Even in Dusk Hollow, people did not like the crypt. The church above it had been built later, the villagers liked to say. The crypt was older than the village, older than the roads, older perhaps than the names people now gave to things in order to feel they understood them. The stone below was black-veined and always damp. The walls carried old carvings no one could read. Children dared each other to touch the iron rings set into burial niches and then ran shrieking back into daylight. Some said the place had once belonged to a noble house of the night. Some said the first villagers had hidden there during raids and bought survival with blood. Some said the dead below were not quite dead enough to forget insult. Lena was given a rusted bucket, a stiff brush, and one tallow candle. "Scrub the red from the floor," Head said. "Maybe honest work in holy ground will cure whatever slyness is growing in you." The stairs were narrow and wet with age. Her candle threw weak light against sweating stone. Each step down smelled more strongly of mineral damp, old iron, and the kind of long-closed air that had never truly belonged to the living. At the bottom, she stopped. The crypt opened around her in rows of old recesses and carved slabs. Some niches had collapsed inward with time. Others had been sealed with black stone engraved in sharp, elegant patterns. The center floor held a ring of worn red sigils faded to the color of old bruises. She set down the bucket and dipped the brush. The first stroke across the floor turned the water pink. "Of course," she murmured. Her voice came back to her strangely, not as an echo, as if the crypt were repeating her with less sound and more memory. She worked in silence. Brush, scrub, rinse. The red darkened in the bucket. Her hands numbed. The candle burned lower. After a while, she noticed something that made her stop. Whoever had used the crypt recently had not merely spilled blood. They had dragged things. Offerings, maybe. Old iron bowls lay overturned. Wax had been kicked across carved names. One memorial shelf had been broken entirely, the little stone cup smashed beside it. Lena looked at the wreckage and felt a quiet anger rise under her ribs. Not fear, not reverence, just dislike. The dead, she thought, had already suffered enough indignity. No one had told her to fix the shelves. No one would know if she did. But after she finished the floor, she began writing what she could. She gathered the broken cup pieces, reset fallen candles, straightened a strip of black ribbon hardened by age, wiped grime from the carved edge of one sealed tomb until an old crest emerged beneath her rag. There. Better. "Someone should have done that sooner," she whispered to the stone. "You did." The voice came from the dark beyond her candle. Lena went cold all at once. A figure stepped out from the far end of the crypt with the kind of stillness that did not belong to ordinary men. He was tall enough to make the ceiling feel lower. Black coat, black gloves. Black hair brushed back from a pale face so sharply cut it looked less born than carved. He moved without hurry, but the silence around him felt active, predatory, as if the shadows themselves recognized his shape. His eyes were dark red, not bright, not theatrical. The deep old red of garnet held to fire. Lena rose too fast and nearly slipped on the wet stone. The candle shook in her hand. Wax spilled across her fingers. The stranger's gaze dropped once to the restored offerings, once to the red water in her bucket, and finally to her face. "You cleaned their blood first," he said. Then their neglect. She gripped the candle harder. Who are you? He looked at her for a moment, and she had the impossible feeling that he was listening to more than her voice. Her pulse, perhaps. Her fear. The shape of her life. Someone the crypt remembers, he said. That was not an answer. It frightened her more than if it had been. He stepped closer. The air changed. Not colder. Denser. As if the dark were drawing itself inward around him, attentive. Lena's back met stone. Up close, he was worse in every possible way. Too beautiful to trust. Too still to mistake for human. No warmth in his skin. No softness in the line of his mouth. And yet none of that was what made her heart begin to pound. It was the restraint. Predators that know they do not need to rush are often the most terrifying. His gaze moved past her shoulder to the memorial shelf she had repaired. You were ordered to scrub the floor, he said, not to honor the dead. I know. Why did you do it? Because the room looked sad, she almost said, and nearly hated herself for it. Such a childish answer. So she told the truth instead. Because someone broke their place, and no one cared. Something shifted in his expression. Very little. Enough. He lifted one hand and trailed gloved fingers over the cleaned carving on the nearest tomb. When he spoke again, his voice had gone lower. They were my family. Lena stopped breathing for a moment. Not traveler, not priest, not thief. Everything Dusk Hollow whispered by winter fires rose at once behind her ribs. Vampire, lord, old house, nightblood, mountain keep. She stared at him. He looked back without blinking. At last she managed, am I supposed to apologize? To her horror, the corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. Something rarer. Brief amusement sharpened by exhaustion. For what? For cleaning badly. For trespassing. For being alive in your crypt. I don't know the correct order. That earned her a longer look. Most villagers scream first, he said. Most villagers are wiser than I am. Or crueler. The answer left her before caution could stop it. Often the same thing here. Silence followed. Then footsteps thundered above. Voices. Lantern lights spilled down the stairwell in jagged orange bands. Mistress Head's voice came first, high with vindication. I told you she was hiding below too long. 3 village men descended with hooks and iron poles as though they had convinced themselves courage was simply the right kind of equipment. Behind them came Father Merrick, chapel keeper, white-faced and sweating. And behind him all came Roarin Vale, village reeve, broad in the shoulders and narrow everywhere else that mattered. They stopped halfway down the stairs. The crypt swallowed their certainty in one breath. Mistress Head saw Lena first, then the man standing near her, then the restored memorials, and whatever accusation she had brought began to die. Father Merrick made the sign against darkness. Roarin recovered fastest, as vain men often do when they mistake composure for power. Who stands in consecrated ground? He demanded. The stranger turned. Every man on the stairs forgot for a second what they had intended to be. When he spoke, his voice did not rise. It did not need to. Lucien Vere. The name moved through the crypt like a blade sliding free of its sheath. Even Lena knew it. Lord of Blackbrier Keep. The vampire who ruled the North Road passes. The one mothers still used as a threat when children lied after sunset. The one who had not set foot openly in the valley in 15 years because fear traveled faster than he ever needed to. Roarin went pale. Father Merrick's icon trembled in his hand. Mistress Head looked as if all her organs had decided simultaneously to fail. My lord, Roarin said at last, his voice rough. Now fear was speaking. Good. Lucian's gaze shifted to Lena's hands, reddened from scrubbing, to the brush, the bucket, the broken memorial cup she had pieced together on the ledge, then to Mistress Head. You sent her here alone. No one answered. The crypt itself seemed to listen. Roran straightened with the brittle confidence of a man who had survived long enough by pretending authority could fill any room if worn aggressively enough. She serves the village, he said carefully. The girl is under our discipline. Lucian looked at him the way one looks at a stain discovered on clean cloth. The girl, he repeated softly. Roran pressed on, because weak men so often do their worst work when they sense themselves losing the room. She steals food, lingers in forbidden places, carries no gift, no standing. No. Lucian moved. Lena did not see him cross the distance. One moment he stood beside the tombs. The next he was halfway up the stair with one pale hand around Roran's throat. Not crushing, not yet, just holding. Roran's boots left the step. Mistress Head made a sound like a kettle beginning to scream. Father Merrick stumbled backward. The men with hooks nearly dropped them. You will choose, Lucian said very gently, the next words that leave your mouth with greater care than you have shown this girl in 19 years. Roran clawed at his wrist. Lucian's expression did not change. You starved her into silence, he went on. You buried her in labor. You sent her below ground with one candle to clean blood from stone, while your village called itself decent. And still she found time to restore what your own hands had broken. He lowered Roran back onto the stair. The reeve nearly collapsed. Lucian turned then, not to the men, but to Father Merrick. The records of Dusk Hollow, he said. The priest blinked. My lord. Bring them. What followed had the sick inevitability of truth entering a room that had relied too long on convenience. The chapel records were fetched from above. Birth ledgers, tithe rolls, family claims, labor allocations. Lena stood wrapped in cold and candle smoke while Lucian turned pages with impossible speed. Then he stopped. A single entry. A notation beside her name from 5 years before. House claim revoked. Dowry rights dissolved. Protection obligations reduced to sustenance labor under parish discretion. Lucian read it once, then again, then very carefully closed the ledger. Roran, still clutching his throat, mistook the silence for hope. As you see, my lord, she remains our responsibility. No, Lucian said. The word was quiet. That made it worse. You stripped her of household standing, he said. Revoked inheritance, removed guarantee of protection, converted belonging into labor, and called it lawful. Roran said nothing. Mistress Head stared at the floor. Father Merrick looked suddenly much older than he had on the stairs. Lucian tapped the page. By your own hand, this village declared Lena Vale. His gaze flicked to her, and the sound of her name in his mouth made something painful catch in her chest. Unclaimed by family protection and unsecured by chapel obligation, beyond bare subsistence. He lifted his eyes. Under the old accords, that makes her free of village claim. Understanding spread through the crypt slowly, then all at once. Roran's face drained, because pride, in its stupidity, had written the line that destroyed his right to keep her. Lucian extended his hand toward Lena. Come here. She stared at him. No one had ever said those words to her like that before. Not as command, not as correction, as invitation. Mistress Head found her voice in a cracked whisper. She belongs to Dusk Hollow. Lucian did not look away from Lena. Do you? The question opened something inside her so sharply it hurt. Did she belong to the kitchen that fed her last? To the chapel that called her empty? To the house that had taken her bed, her name, and eventually even her share of warmth? Did she belong to the people who used her hands but not her existence? Lena swallowed. The whole crypt waited. "No," she whispered. Lucian nodded once, as if confirming a thing he had known from the moment he saw her kneeling beside the dead. "Then she does not." Roran made a desperate sound. "You cannot simply take—" "This is not theft," Lucian said. "It is correction." He crossed the room and stopped before Lena. Up close, the scent of him was winter cedar, old stone, and something darker beneath both. Night air over snow. "You are shaking," he said. She gave a raw little laugh. "That seems reasonable." Again, that almost smile. He removed his gloves. His bare hand rose slowly, giving her every chance to recoil. Instead, she stood very still as cool fingers touched the inside of her wrist. The world changed, not around her, inside. A pulse flared beneath her skin that was not her own, and yet somehow answered her exactly. Heat moved up her arm in a bright, impossible line. Her knees nearly gave way. Lucian's expression altered for the first time. Not fear, recognition. Dangerous and intimate. His fingers tightened. "You feel that," he said. It was not a question. Lena could barely breathe. What was that? Something in his face closed carefully over itself. "Not for this room," he said. Then louder to the others. "She leaves with me now." No one tried to stop him. Dawn had not yet broken when they departed Dusk Hollow. A black carriage waited beyond the birches, drawn by horses so quiet they seemed trained not merely in discipline but in secrecy. Riders flanked the road in dark wool and leather, their eyes fixed ahead, their presence alone enough to make the villagers shrink back from doorways. Someone had gathered Lena's belongings into a single linen sack. 2 dresses, a comb with half its teeth gone, a small tin spoon, and a square of blue cloth from her mother's old shawl, which she had kept hidden for years beneath a loose plank in the shed. That was all. Lucian noticed the cloth in her hands once they were inside the carriage. "You kept that," he said. "It was mine." The answer sounded foolish as soon as she said it. Everything she owned was technically hers. Yet the cloth felt different. Proof not of property, but of continuity. That she had once belonged to some earlier version of the world where being loved had not felt absurd. He said nothing for a long moment. Snow moved past the carriage window in pale streaks. At last he said, "You were taught to survive by saving scraps of yourself." Lena looked down at the cloth. "Yes. You may stop doing that at Blackbrier." She almost laughed. People who had never lived by scraps said things like that easily. Still, the warmth from his touch had not fully faded from her wrist, and against all reason, she wanted to believe him. Blackbrier Keep rose from the mountain in black stone terraces and narrow towers, less like a castle built by men than a section of night-given architecture. Yet it was no ruin. Lanterns burned along the walls. The gates opened before them without creak or hesitation. Snow had been cleared for the inner court. No one rushed, no one shouted. The place moved with the frightening calm of old power that had nothing to prove. Lucian led her inside himself, not past to servants, not forgotten in an entry hall. Inside, warmth hit her so fast she swayed. The great hall was all dark wood, crimson drapery, candlelight, and polished black floor reflecting 100 flames. Faces turned as they entered, nobles, attendants, guards, some human, some not. Every eye landed on Lena's worn dress, her rough hands, and Lucian's expression beside her. A silver-haired woman descended the stair. Her gown was plain compared to the room, which made the authority in her posture even more obvious. "This is Madame Elise," Lucien said. "She governs the inner household." Elise studied Lena once from boots to face, not with contempt, with frightening intelligence. Then she bowed her head. "My lord," to Lucien. Then, after the smallest pause, "My lady." Lena stared. "There has been a mistake," she said. Elise's face did not change. "There has. It simply did not begin here." That was almost enough to undo her. She was taken not to servants' quarters, but to a chamber larger than the entire shed she had slept in for 5 years. Fire crackled in a carved hearth. Hot water waited in a copper bath. A dark blue gown lay folded on the bed beside soft stockings and a winter robe lined in fur. Lena stood in the doorway and felt, very suddenly, very stupidly, like a dirty thing that had wandered into a church. Eliza waited. "I don't know how to be in this room," Lena admitted. "Most people don't," Elise said. "They simply pretend more elegantly." That startled a laugh out of her. It hurt her throat. Later, after heat and clean clothes and more food than she could finish, the strange pulse beneath her wrist returned, then moved. Not through her skin this time, through her chest, a warmth low beneath the sternum. Not painful, not pleasant either. A tug. A second awareness. The physician came. Lucian came with him. The physician's name was Severin, thin and grave, and old enough that his eyes had passed beyond curiosity into precision. He examined Lena carefully while Lucian stood by the fire pretending distance was the same thing as detachment. It was not. Every time Severin touched her wrist, Lucian's gaze sharpened. Every time Lena flinched, the room's temperature seemed to drop a fraction. At last, Severin pressed 2 fingers lightly to the center of her chest and went still. "Well," he murmured. Lucian's voice came from the hearth. "Say it plainly." Severin withdrew his hand. "She is not empty." The sentence entered the room like a blade. Lena stared at him. Severin folded his hands. "There is old blood in you, my lady. Old enough that a village test would miss it completely if they were ignorant, frightened, or looking only for the easy kinds of magic. Yours is neither absent nor human in the ordinary sense. It is dormant." Lena shook her head. "No." "Yes." "What does that mean?" Severin glanced once at Lucian, then back to her. "It means some ancestor of yours stood closer to the night than Dusk Hollow would have found comfortable. It means your blood recognized Lord Vere the moment he touched you. And it means the bond you felt in the crypt was not imagination." Her breath caught. Bond. The word hung in the air between them, too intimate to ignore, too dangerous to touch. Lucian crossed the room then, not quickly, deliberately. He stopped before her chair and lowered himself to one knee so that his eyes met hers. He did not touch her. That restraint nearly hurt more than if he had. "In old houses," he said, "there are blood recognitions rarer than vows and harder to break. Most never occur. Some appear once in generations. Mine answered yours." Lena looked at him. "Why?" His mouth tightened slightly. "If I had that answer already," he said, "my life would be less inconvenient." Despite everything, she smiled. Only a little. His gaze changed when she did. Softer would be the wrong word. More careful, perhaps, as if her smallest expression mattered to him far more than he intended. Severin continued, mercifully clinical. "Neglect can force unusual bloodlines inward. A person told often enough that she is nothing may begin at the deepest level to close the doors inside herself. Your body endured by becoming quiet. Lena's hands folded into the blue cloth in her lap. Does that mean, she asked slowly, that they were wrong about all of it? Lucian answered before the physician could. Yes. One word. Absolute. No gentling. No pity. Just truth. He looked at her with a steadiness so complete it made her chest ache. They lied because it was useful, he said, and because small people often need someone near them to carry the shape of failure they fear in themselves. Lena cried then, not gracefully, not softly. The kind of crying that belongs to people who have lived too long inside a false story and have only just discovered the walls were painted by other hands. Lucian remained where he was, kneeling, saying nothing. When her fingers trembled too badly to hold the cloth, he took it before it fell and folded it carefully over her hands as if it were something sacred, because it mattered to her. That was the first moment she was truly frightened of him in a new way. Not because he was a monster, because kindness from someone powerful can be more destabilizing than cruelty ever was. Cruelty explains the world you already know. Kindness demands a new one. The lies from Dusk Hollow reached Blackbrier by the third day. She bewitched him. She had crawled into the crypt to bargain with darkness. She was a cunning gutter girl with a talent for false innocence. Lucian read the report in silence, then folded it once, twice, and said, "Prepare the horses." Lena looked up from the window seat where the late light painted the mountains snow gold. "You're going back. We are." The word landed inside her with equal parts warmth and dread. He met her gaze. "There are corrections best made publicly." Dusk Hollow received them at noon beneath a sky the color of worn tin. This time Blackbrier did not arrive quietly. Riders entered first in dark formation, then the carriage, then Lucian, descending into the village square with all the contained violence of a storm that had chosen a human shape out of courtesy. Lena stepped down after him in blue wool and a black winter cloak that still felt borrowed from some better life, though Elise had informed her twice already that it was now hers. The villagers stared, not because she looked noble, because she looked visible. That alone unsettled them. Roran stood before the chapel trying to wear dignity over panic. Mistress Head hovered nearby in a shawl, already looking as though she regretted being alive. Father Merrick had gone gray around the mouth. Lucian did not address them first. He turned to the square, to the doorways, to the faces half hidden under hoods and scarves. "Look at her," he said. And because command lived in him differently than in other beings, they did. At the girl they had trained themselves not to see, at the hands that had cleaned their dead, their kitchens, their blood, their shame. At the face they had called empty, because admitting her value would have required conscience. At 19, Lucian said, this village gave her less protection than a winter mule. By your own records, you denied inheritance, revoked household claim, and reduced her life to labor in exchange for scraps. Yet now you invoke belonging only because someone stronger than you has noticed what you were doing. No one moved. Snow drifted slowly between them. Roran found anger because fear had failed him. She was ours by birth. Lena felt old instincts rush up at once. Be quiet. Lower your eyes. Endure. But the strange, warm pulse in her chest answered back. Steady, present. She stepped forward before she had fully decided to. I belonged here, she said, surprised by how clear her own voice sounded in the square. When I was useful. Silence deepened. I belonged when floors needed scrubbing and fever buckets needed carrying. I belonged when there was ash to haul and blood to wash and not enough hands willing to touch ugly work. Mistress head flinched. Lena went on, but I did not belong when I needed kindness. I did not belong when I was hungry. I did not belong when I was cold. I did not belong when I was called empty so often that even I began to believe it. She looked at the chapel, at the kitchen, at the shed behind the root cellar she had once thought would be her whole life. So no, she said, and this time the word rang clean. I do not belong to Dusk Hollow. Something changed across the square then, not in all faces, never all, but enough. Enough lowered eyes, enough shame, enough discomfort in people who had long relied on her silence to protect the comfort of their own story. Lucian stepped beside her. Let it be witnessed, he said. Lena Vale stands under the protection of Blackbrier by right of blood recognition and by your own forfeiture of claim. Any slander or harm against her will answer to me. Roran tried to speak. Nothing came out that could survive daylight. The ride back felt different, not because the road had changed, because she had. Something in Lena loosened on that journey north, not all at once. Healing rarely honors dramatic timing, but enough. That night she dreamed of a corridor lined with closed doors. From behind every door came some older version of herself. Kitchen girl, shed girl, empty girl, quiet girl, useful girl, no gift girl. She walked past them all. At the end of the corridor stood Lucian beside an open arch full of moonlight. He did not speak. He only held out his hand. This time, in the dream, she took it without fear. She woke with his name in her throat. He was already at the doorway. She sat up too fast. How? The bond woke me. Moonlight silvered the room. The fire had burned low. He remained by the door, though the concern in his face had already crossed whatever distance courtesy required. You were in pain, he said. I don't think it was pain. The words lingered. He came closer, stopped beside the chair rather than the bed. Again that care. Again the refusal to take 1 inch she had not offered. What am I to you? She asked before sense could stop her. No titles, no politeness, just the question underneath all the others. Lucian went very still. Then he sat, hands clasped once between his knees like a man considering whether honesty was a greater risk than silence. To my blood, he said at last, you are recognition. To this house, you are under my protection. To me. He stopped. That pause told her more than any elegant answer. Lucienne. His gaze lifted to hers. To me, he said softly, you are the first impossible thing I have not wanted explained away. Her heart turned over. And if I don't know what to do with that, then I wait. No grand seduction, no claim disguised as destiny. Just that. Then I wait. Weeks passed. Winter thinned. Blackbrier adjusted around her the way old houses do when they decide a person is not temporary after all. Elisa stopped asking whether her rooms were comfortable and simply had them made so. Severin brought her books on northern bloodlines and ruined lineages. The guards bowed without mockery. The servants met her eyes, and Lucian remained precisely what he was, controlled, ancient, dangerous, and with her, patient in a way that felt more intimate than touch. One evening he found her in the memorial gallery where portraits of the dead lined the walls above candle-lit niches. You came back here willingly, he said. She ran her fingers lightly over a polished stone ledge. The crypt frightened me less once I realized the dead were treated with more dignity here than the living were in Dusk Hollow. A shadow crossed his face at that. Then he said, "That will not be true much longer." It took her a second to understand. "You mean the village?" "I mean I have no interest in leaving systems intact merely because they are old." She looked at him, at the calm with which he said it, at the terrible restraint in him, at the fact that for all his power, he never raised his voice with her, never made her fear the room he occupied. "I used to think being chosen would feel loud," she said. "And now?" Lena thought of the carriage warmth, the blue cloak, the way her name sounded when he spoke it as if it had weight, the way he waited. "It feels," she said slowly, "like being seen for so long that hiding stops working." That was when he kissed her. Not quickly, not hungrily. With the deliberate care of a man touching something breakable and discovering to his quiet astonishment that it was also brave. His hand lifted to her face and paused there the smallest fraction before contact, leaving room for refusal. She gave none. The kiss was winter wine, candle smoke, and all the words they had not yet learned to say aloud. When they parted, she rested her forehead briefly against his chest and listened. No heartbeat, and yet no absence either. Only him. Only the impossible fact that some beings were cold to the touch and still felt like warmth. By spring, Dusk Hollow sent tribute, not because it had become noble, because it had learned fear correctly. Lucian accepted the tribute and redirected half of it to widows, laborers, and winter stores for the families the Reeve had always counted last. Elise called it policy. Severin called it justice. Lena suspected it was both. She returned to the village once, not for vengeance, for closure. The shed still stood. The kitchen still smelled of onions and smoke. The chapel still rang the same bell. But nothing in it could hold her now. Mistress Head cried when she saw her and tried to apologize. Lena listened, then forgave her only enough to stop carrying her. That was the difference. Forgiveness did not restore the old life. It merely meant the old life no longer lived inside her rent-free. That night, back at Blackbrier, she stood on the highest terrace and watched the mountains darken under evening blue. Below, windows glowed warm through the keep. Somewhere in the West Hall, musicians tuned strings. Somewhere in the kitchens, someone laughed. The house moved around her with its own old disciplined life. Lucian came to stand behind her. She knew his presence before he touched her. The bond no longer startled. It hummed, low, steady, woven into her. His arms came around her waist. She leaned back into him not because she was fragile, and not because he demanded it. Because trust, she had learned, could be chosen just as deliberately as fear once had been. "The council wants you at next week's hearing," he murmured against her hair. "Will there be old men saying foolish things about bloodlines?" "Almost certainly." "Then I should attend." His laugh was soft. She looked out at the mountains and thought of the girl in the crypt with raw hands, a rusted bucket, and one guttering candle. The girl who thought dignity was something other people were born with and she had somehow missed. She wished she could go back and tell that girl one thing. Not that a lord would come, not that blood would wake, not even that the village was wrong. Something simpler. You were never empty. Inside her chest, the long-silenced inheritance answered with a warm, living pulse. And for the first time in her life, Lena understood that being chosen had nothing to do with suddenly becoming worthy. She had always been worthy. The miracle was only that someone powerful enough had finally said so out loud. If this story stirred something in you, don't let it end here. Like the video if Lena's journey stayed with you. Subscribe and turn on the bell for more dark romance tales, haunted keeps, forbidden bloodlines, and stories about the ones the world overlooked until the night told the truth. And tell me in the comments, what moment hit you the hardest?